Hello, welcome everybody. Hello, welcome everybody to the part one of the session on trauma. And this is being delivered for the Hastings Area Opportunity Fund. And my name is Dr. Claire Stubbs and I work for Boing Boing as part of the University of Brighton. And Boing Boing are a community interest company, and our passion and focus is resilience, and particularly focusing on those most disadvantaged individuals and communities, and looking at the research around resilience and then how we can transfer that into practice for, like I say, the most disadvantaged individuals, young people, children, families and communities. So then today we're going to think about looking at trauma, and then particularly thinking about how we can support children in that primary school age around trauma. So the first part of the session is we're going to think about, sorry, let me just move this along. Yeah, so it's thinking about understanding what trauma is, how the brain responds to trauma. We're going to think a little bit about the autonomic nervous system, our survival responses to trauma, how we can help children understand how they're feeling and if they're experiencing a trauma response, thinking about what you're currently doing and embracing that, and then just taking some time. Obviously, it's an online recording, so we won't be debriefing together, but actually it's still really important that you just take that time to reflect and think about what you've learned. And then the great thing about it being online as well is that you can pause it at any time. Like I say, just take some time. If this is a quite an emotionally evocative session as well, so if you do need to take care of yourself at any time, you can obviously pause the video, and maybe make sure you have someone in your phone that you can kind of reach out to and contact if you need to chat anything through, who you know will be there for you, a colleague or a friend. So like it says there, please do what you need to do in order to keep yourself safe. So if you're aware of something in terms of your own parts, and then that might potentially be activated, then like I say, try and put something in place now to sort of keep yourself safe throughout the session. So let's make a start then. So just pause the video for about 5 minutes, and then just thinking about how do you think about trauma, what springs to mind when you think about that as a definition, and then in your practice, what traumatic experiences do you face with the children that you're working with. So like I say, just take a moment to pause the video, take about 5 minutes to think about both of those things. So when trying to understand trauma, so Bessel van der Kolk is a leading pioneer in the field of trauma research, and he says that trauma pushes us beyond our normal coping capacities and something that we can't process or deal with. So it's an experience that is too overwhelming for the individual system. So then the system adapts in order to preserve its survival, and we'll think about what adapting means a bit further down the line. And obviously what we need to remember is individual differences. So trauma for one person is not necessarily going to feel traumatic for another, because we all go through different experiences and have a different level of capacity. And also as well, it's really important to think about when that trauma has happened in that child's life, how repetitive it might have been, the child's response to that, and any other responses around them, and also if they had anyone intervene at any time, because all of these things are going to really impact on how they experience the trauma. And it's really interesting as well when, in my experience, people really struggle, to articulate their experience as trauma. But ultimately, like I say, if somebody really remembers something, then there's something about the strength of that experience that they've gone through that might lead us, to kind of feel that actually it was traumatic in some way, because we tend to kind of really remember these experiences. And often as well, something, if people check out or dissociate or disconnect, then this is a real reaction to having experienced trauma. And then sometimes that can be when people actually begin to acknowledge their early experiences as traumatic. So now we're going to think about how our bodies respond to trauma, and there's a lot of information here. So like I say, just kind of, if you've got a pen, note some things down, but obviously as well, it'll be really important to kind of pause the video if there's anything as well that you're struggling to take in, because don't forget, you're going to be thinking about the children that you work with, but also undoubtedly you're going to be kind of holding your own experiences or people in your family as well. So if you're struggling to take it in, it could be for those reasons that it's difficult to hear. So thinking about the impact of trauma on the body. So traumatic stress kicks off a series of physical responses that, like I say, are geared for survival in the short term. Yet then if someone goes through trauma and it's repetitive, then they can be detrimental long term. So early trauma profoundly affects the way in which the brain organises and processes its experiences. The brain becomes geared towards sensing and responding to threat because it actually is geared to kind of helping us survive. So thinking about what will help us survive. So, and the other thing about the brain on trauma, so if you think about the little girl there that's shown in the frontal lobe, so that's our logical, rational area of our brain where we make our decisions, and then we've got our emotional brain as well, which is where you see the chimp, so that's in our limbic system. So, and then in normal kind of, when we have optimal healthy development, if you like, there's often a bridge that is developed between the emotional brain and the logical brain, which helps us make sense of our experiences so that we can interpret them and understand then what might have happened emotionally for us, and then, like I say, kind of come to a conclusion that holds both the rational and the emotional. Whereas when what research is showing us, and it's evolving all the time, the research around the brain, is that people that have experienced traumatic experiences, that bridge that I was talking about between the emotional and the rational and logical brain, it struggles to develop, basically. So hence then why when somebody has had a repeat of traumatic experiences, they can feel very much in that emotional brain place. So as well as that, when we're all in a kind of fight or flight place, then we do struggle to think rationally or logically, and the reason for that is because the frontal lobe switches off. So the amygdala kicks out the logical frontal lobes, so it turns it off basically. So then, when people are in that fight or flight place, and we'll talk about it a bit more in a while, they do struggle to think. So often, isn't it, it's a temptation to kind of say to people, what were you thinking? Why did you end up doing that? And the chances are, if they were under stress or in an anxious place, then they probably would have had little capacity to think. So if we're thinking about children as well, so also children are predominantly emotional brained, and the left brain has a spurt of growth around the age of language development, and then again at adolescence. But actually, that bridge that I was talking about, it does over time connect our right and left brains, and that then still doesn't become fully elaborated until around the age of 12. So this is why our pre-adolescence may be very emotive. So like I say, when children are traumatized, it can really impact on the development of that bridge. And so this means that they struggle then to form a coherent story about what has happened, and also then struggle to interpret or make sense of experiences. So therefore, the right side does not forget the non-verbal aspects, but it doesn't get interpreted and then therefore integrated. So therefore, without that bridge, there might not be any memory of the right brain's emotion-driven actions and reactions. So therefore, what ends up happening is the body remembers, or it becomes very oversensitive to threat. And then we'll talk about it in a second, but the autonomic nervous system then responds, and sometimes the child might not even know why, because, like I say, there's been that lack of frontal lobe logical, rational processing. So hence, like I say, people, not being clear or being able to understand why they've done what they've done, for example, because of that, either having had so much, a level of trauma that has really compromised that bridge being built between the logical and the emotional brain. And also, if people are in a fight-flight place, then the frontal lobe also shuts down when they're in that place. So there's two key things to take away from this slide. Is, like I say, people who have experienced trauma will, that bridge between the logical and emotional brain may be compromised. So therefore, they haven't been able to interpret or form a story about what has happened to them. And also, like I was saying, so children are predominantly emotional brained anyway, so they need us to be their frontal logical lobes for them, especially up until about the age of 12. And also, and we will continue to talk about it, if people are in that fight or flight place, then also the limbic system or the emotional brain takes over and then shuts down the frontal lobe. So when they're incredibly anxious, they're also not able to think either. So, and we'll talk about it more in all of our sessions, but that's why, first and foremost, it's just really important to be with the person and to be soothing them with your language, your presence, your tone, to just help calm them first, so that then, because once we're calm, then that logical, rational brain comes back online again. So that first and foremost, needs to be the focus, because otherwise they won't be able to hear any intervention that you're making. So first and foremost, we need to support them to, like I say, be calm. And we'll talk about some grounding techniques as we go along. So now we're going to think for a second about our autonomic nervous system. So the brain is our central nervous system, and then we have our autonomic nervous system that's geared towards preserving our survival. And the autonomic nervous system has two strands to it, if you like. So the parasympathetic branch focuses on supporting us to be able to rest and digest our food. So those basic things, that we need in order to function. And then you've got the sympathetic part of our nervous system, which is our fight and flight system. And this sets us up for survival in terms of if there's a threat. So, and they have a really complementary relationship in our bodies. So the sympathetic part ramps you up ready for action, and then the parasympathetic slows you down and prepares you for rest. So if we think about it, we're going to think about it as a traffic light system in terms of then, what gets set off if we're under threat, and then also where we need to get to in order, to feel calm and feel safe. So there's three physiological states in terms of our autonomic nervous system. So green is what is known as the social engagement system. So when we're in a green place, so I'm in a green place now as I'm talking to you. So all is well. I feel calm. I'm presenting, so I'm not 100% chilled and relaxed. But yeah, this is that state that we're in, where we can see clearly, we can hear clearly, and I know that there's no immediate threat to me. And then sadly, as it states there, so for people that have had a lot of developmental trauma in their life, so in their early histories, or if people have had severe traumatic events happen, then sometimes it can be that actually they only experience being in this place very occasionally. So then obviously with your help, it's about how we teach them strategies so that they can take charge of their system, if you like, rather than their system taking charge of them. So if you're walking along the road at night time and you hear, say it's the leaves, isn't it, that are rustling, then naturally, it may trigger off the amber state where we kind of perceive that there's a threat in the environment because it's nighttime, you're walking by yourself. So then that may take us into a state of mobilization, which is the fight or flight response. So, and the amygdala responds within 7 milliseconds. So that's the emotional part of the brain. The brain decides if the incoming data, so in terms of what's happening in the environment, does actually represent a threat. And then if so, then the sympathetic nervous system kicks into action. And so then our bodies then begin the process of preparing us for danger. It's fascinating and amazing what the body does. So there's a rush of adrenaline. Cortisol, the stress hormone, is also injected into our system. So our pupils dilate, so we can see more clearly if we need to. We want to empty our bowels so we can run faster. So that's why if you're about to present or do some training, if you get nervous, this is what happens. The blood supply is shifted into our muscles in case we need to literally fight. Our mouth goes dry because we don't need saliva for digestion. and the cortisol then prepares us for extended stress, because cortisol is the stress hormone. But this is a really fascinating piece as well. So cortisol also suppresses the inflammatory response. So if we get hurt, then the body doesn't swell. So you would still be able to run if you needed to. I think that's fascinating. If there's no threat, then the adrenaline will be deactivated within about 5 minutes. So if you actually realise that it was just the leaves and there isn't somebody there, it can still take about 5 minutes though, before the system settles and calms down. People go into the red zone when something is completely overwhelming and the system perceives that there isn't anything to be done. So it's not possible, to kind of either fight or flee from the situation. So it freezes the system. So the person just goes into a shutdown. You might have seen people being like this, or, like my body's really tense now. So it's the opposite really of that flee response. And again, it's a bit like when animals sort of feign death. The human instinct to preserve survival is exactly the same. And when people are in the freeze state, their metabolism shuts down, the heart rate and breathing slows, and the muscle tone is weak. So it is literally the opposite to the physical response that I was describing. If somebody is in the amber place. So, and like I say, isn't it so short term, these responses can be really useful, yet if they're repetitive and ongoing, then obviously they can have a detrimental impact on the person in terms of their mental health, and we're going to talk about that, but also in terms of their immune system. If you think about, isn't it, the body's having to respond in this way, then over time that can have more of a deleterious impact. How are you doing? There's a lot to take in, so it might be a good place to just pause, rewind a little bit, see if there's anything you missed, because like I say, there is a lot of information here, and it might be we're just under halfway through in terms of the slides for this part 1, so it might be a good opportunity to just take a breath and get a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. Just let yourself, like I say, digest that information. So continuing on then to think about the fight and flight or the freeze response. So I guess here, Dr. Porges is another academic in the field, and kind of done a lot of work in kind of thinking about the sympathetic nervous system, the ventral vagal system, the dorsal vagal. So applied what happens in the system to these aspects of our nervous system. And I guess, so what happens in people, if they've had a lot of trauma, then once the system has been exposed to it repetitively, then obviously it becomes oversensitive. So we all have an innate kind of what is called in the literature as neuroception. So our senses are innately primed to assess all new situations or situations for risk, danger, and safety. Our systems do it so innately that we don't even realise. And like I say, our senses then communicate in lightning speed, 7 milliseconds, as I mentioned before, to our brain and our autonomic nervous system, directing us to the next action required to keep us safe. So this is known, like I say, as our neuroception. is our unconscious ability to assess for risk and danger and safety. And so this explains why a baby will coo at the caregiver, and then maybe cry at a stranger. And so in children or people that have been traumatized, their neuroception has been so overworked that in a way it becomes faulty. So because, like I say, there's none of that logical, rational processing, or the bridge between the logical and emotional brain has been compromised. So then people that have been traumatized end up seeing the world as it was, rather than as it is. So it might be more difficult, to kind of support people, to arrive here, in supporting them to understand and believe that the world is safe, because only then will it reduce this or this response. And initially, this or the freeze response may get triggered because, like I say, the system has become oversensitive. So there's an oversensitivity to environmental cues. So hence sometimes, isn't it, when if you might look at someone a particular way, and if they've been traumatized, then they can receive that as a threat, because that may have been threatening at one time. So there's not the capacity there to then separate the present from the past. Like I say, people that have experienced trauma tend to see things, how they were rather than how they are. And so that's, part of then what needs attending to in terms of the work. So just to summarize that then, so there can be, the legacy of trauma is that there could be either, that kind of emotional overload, which then might take people into that kind of what we call hyper alert, which is that fight or flight place, or people can go into the shutdown, which we call hypo. So fight or flight is hyper, when you're on alert, and like I say, either fighting or fleeing, and then the shutdown is the hypo. And I guess we don't know, we're not sure, how people will respond, because the response is very individual, and it also will, I guess, depend on the trauma that they've experienced, their own personality and how they've responded, and responses that they've received from the environment as well. So, and like I talked about just now, so there also can be an oversensitivity to things that happen in the environment, and that can then automatically trigger off this fight or flight or freeze response. And then there's a tendency then, as it says there, to experience those cues as either dangerous or threatening. It's in terms of if people's neuroception has been overworked, then there can be kind of an overstimulation as well around noise, and I guess then a lack of capacity as well to identify things that might not be threatening, but as well as not being able to see things as they are, also it's hard for people to hear that things might be different now, so that's why it takes, it can take sometimes a lot of soothing, like you're safe now, you're in the present, you're okay, you're not in any danger, and that's why, as well, as it can be really useful to say people's name, like Jane, you're here now, it's 2020, you're safe, you're not in any danger, because just hearing their name as well can help them come back into the present. So then obviously as part of that hyper alert, then people just then jump to conclusions, because like I say, there's no interruption there with any logical, rational thinking. And so and like I say, it's based on past experiences. So it's like, if that person's looking at me that way, that means that they're annoyed at me, or they're rejecting me in some way. So there's that emotional jumping to conclusions. And then and we'll talk about it a bit more as we go on, people then, in an attempt to be safe, can kind of develop very emotionally driven or impulsive behaviours, which are an attempt to protect them and survive, even if that's not the desired response, or if that's not the impact necessarily. Yet ultimately that is the intention on the part of that individual to try and protect themselves. So it may be a good point, like I say, to just kind of pause, just take a breather. There's a lot of information there. You might want to rewind it and go over anything that you missed, because like I say, there is a lot of information. And just check in with yourself as well now, like, how are you doing? How are your parts doing? Is there anything that needs attending to in you? Do you need to connect with that friend that we mentioned at the beginning? Yeah, just take a moment to just check in and see how you are. So have a think as well in terms of, so obviously trauma leaves a real legacy in terms of the beliefs that people develop in relation to themselves and the world. So maybe just pause the video now and then have a think about what beliefs you notice in children that you've worked with that have been traumatized or experienced trauma in their little early lives, and how these might relate to how they see themselves or their beliefs about the world as well. Okay, welcome back. So often some beliefs that people share are I don't exist. So if people really have had really severe experiences around not being seen, or it's not been safe to be themselves, so then they've adapted, and the belief is it's safer if I don't exist, or if they've had horrendous things happen to them, I don't exist can be a way of coping with that, just checking out of life. I need to be perfect. Constant messages around them not being good enough or not feeling like they're good enough, and then this can create a belief around I need to be perfect, I need to be strong, if there hasn't been space for their feelings, or they witness other people around them not feeling. Other people are more important than me. My feelings don't matter. The world is not safe. People are safe. I need to look after others. I am useless. The world would be better if I disappeared. It's all my fault. I need to try harder, and I'm not good enough. So some really painful and traumatic beliefs there that I see too often in my work, actually. So I'm sure they corresponded with some of the ones that came up for you, and you might also have different ones too. So then, as a result of, so between the ages of 0 to 7, we come into this world, and then we're looking at the world around us, taking in what we are from other people who are responding and relating to us, and then we decide what we need to do in order to keep ourselves safe. And this is what we mean by adapting. So how do I need to change myself in order to be safe? So the child will be scanning and learning from their environment what they can do to preserve their own physical safety, but also psychological safety as well, and ultimately to meet those fundamental needs to be loved and to be liked. So yeah, so thinking about those beliefs that we talked about first, that they might develop. So then, and then we all do this. So then we enlist protective parts of us to try and keep those core beliefs at bay, if you like. So for example, if I have a belief that I'm not good enough, so the protective part becomes, okay, I'll try and be perfect, so that then I'm defending against not feeling not good enough. If I have a belief that I'm never seen by others, or I feel like I've been seen, then the protective part will be, I'll just constantly try harder, because then hopefully people will see me. So it may be that you have a child that's working really, really hard, and because this is prized, isn't it, in the learning environment, it might not be as obvious that there's something that's underneath that's actually painful. So I guess that goes, the point that we made in the first presentation around working with mental health through a resilience lens, the importance of not overlooking the children that do work really hard, or that might be quiet, because there could be something that's also going on for them. If you have a belief of other people are more important than me, then it may be that the individual enlists a caretaker part in them, kind of constantly looking after other people. And we can see this quite early on in children, because like I say, it's through those formative years between 0 and 7 that we're deciding who we need to be in order to be safe and loved. And then obviously then that's being reinforced, particularly if there's no intervention. It's my fault or I'm too much, then understandably I'll restrict who I am, because I don't want to risk the pain of being too much or feeling like it's my fault. It's not okay to feel, or feelings are dangerous, then the individual will try and be strong and kind of not feel, or the world is unsafe, so constantly on the lookout for danger. And yeah, lastly, so it's my fault, so therefore the person might take on too much responsibility, kind of defending from that painful place of it was me that was responsible, or I am to blame. And the thing about, one or two things can happen. So children, rather than risk directing their anger at the parents or the caretakers for letting them down, the child, will internalize that and actually say, it must be about me. And this is called the basic fault. Or the other response may be, it's all about them. So other people are at fault. So, and then either way, it can be, it can cause pain or be risky for the child, I guess, because then, for the child that's blaming others, there's still a lot of pain and anger there, and so ultimately, they are feeling let down and hurt. It's just a different way of dealing with it. So then when those protector parts that we develop are threatened, so if there's a trigger in the environment that threatens the protectors that we've put in place, and a core belief is then touched upon or reached, this then can be received by the system as a threat. So, for example, being told off, that would potentially or could elicit the belief I'm no good, or not doing a good piece of work. So again, I'm not good enough. Or the other example there of if someone gets upset with them, that's then going to potentially trigger off other experiences where that's happened, and that belief underneath of I must be bad, it's my fault, because perhaps there was an absence of people in their environment being able to challenge these beliefs. So therefore the beliefs are very very present, very raw. So then it only sometimes it can only take something like this, one of these examples, to happen in order to then kind of light the flame on these painful beliefs. So then what do we do when this happens? We don't just do these things as children. So we enlist soothers, and soothers become more accessible, I guess, and available the older that we get. So when children move from being children into adolescence, and things like food or sex or substance misuse or alcohol, they become very readily available, and then can be a way of numbing the pain of these core beliefs that have been kind of raised as a result of something that's happening in the environment. Or it may be that actually, particularly for adolescents, it may be that these core beliefs have been, tried to be suppressed for so long, and now they need, there's been this cycle of trying to soothe with the biting or the cutting, and actually then it's become too hard for the system to keep these feelings at bay, and that's when there needs another intervention. So it does become, so you've got all those protective parts working really hard to try and keep those core beliefs at bay, so keep them away, keep them suppressed. Something happens, and then a way of trying to soothe again is, like I say, to engage in one of these or a few of these behaviours, and we have a whole session on looking at soothers such as biting and cutting and how you support children with them. So that will be there for you to take advantage of as well. And there may be other soothers that you also notice in the children that you work with, like pulling hair, for example, or pinching their skin, or there's the list is endless. So maybe just have a pause here, like I say, and just reflect on someone that you're working with, and also just have a think about what these different responses evoke in you, what they bring to mind for you. And again, as always, just really try and take care of yourself. This is a very emotive session, and like I say, you're not just going to be coming at this from a professional point of view, but you also have personal parts in you as well, that might also be triggered. So do what you need to do in terms of looking after yourself. Maybe a good point to completely have a pause here, go for a walk, like I say, reach out to someone, because it can be tough connecting with this stuff, because actually we don't just connect with things on a professional level, and they also do undoubtedly impact on us personally as well, because that's what brings us into the work. And we do have a whole other session as well on practitioner resilience, so it's worth tapping into that one too. So welcome back if you had a pause, and hope you did able to do something nice for yourself. So then, thinking about all this, how can we help children make sense of it? So Professor Stephen Peters wrote a book called The Chimp Paradox, and whereas it's not necessarily based on trauma as such, it does help children understand what's happening in terms of that the emotional brain, because actually chimps only have an emotional brain. So it's just a really creative and accessible way, like I say, of helping children understand, that when that part in them takes over, that actually it's their inner chimp. I use it all the time with children, and often I also give children a little teddy bear chimp to look after, because again, that's another, just a really creative way of helping them connect with that part of them. And also then through the external toy, you can help children encourage and build a relationship in relation to that chimp. So help them, have compassion, help them really understand the chimp's behavior, and like I say, help them, kind of learn how to soothe their chimp, and actually what their chimp needs when it gets triggered or becomes activated. So yeah, helping them understand themselves, and also then how to look after their emotional selves. So, and Professor Stephen Peters and his team have also written a book that can be used with children. So it's got some really nice prompts and questions, getting the child to name their chimp and things like that, and helping them understand what sort of things set off the chimp. So it's just a really child-friendly way of helping them understand. So I don't know if you can see it on this slide there. So locally, the Child Therapy Service .org.uk has loads of resources. I've worked with Tracy to create some resources around the chimp, so that then I could use them in my work with children. And she is a charity, and we do work closely with her in Boing Boing. So I definitely recommend you accessing those resources, because there's lots of other resources on her website for children who have sensory needs, or children who experience autism, or just lots and lots of great resources and activities that you can use to help children make sense of what they're feeling, and also how to support them to soothe as well. So this is just a really nice example of something that you could have in the classroom that, again, just helps children identify where they are, how they're feeling, how they might have been feeling when something got triggered in them or got set off in them. Because sometimes as well, it's hard, for children to differentiate between things like wobbly and fizzy, for example. So I just think it's a really nice scale. And also then from a teaching perspective, just really handy to know, isn't it, what you've got happening in the class in terms of the different levels of emotions and where people are at. And also then, to use it as a way to help children thinking, okay, if I'm there, then what helps me, get to here, or if I'm here, for example, what helps me feel calm, and also thinking about what sets me off here, what triggers that hot place in me too. And again, this is part of the same pack from the Child Therapy Service, But again, you know, it's really helpful for problem solving. So helping children identify something that feels problematic for them. And yeah, again, just, you know, externalizing that, exploring different scenarios that they might have to face. And then, yeah, what's the feeling? And then also, how can we, you know, support the chimp when he's feeling that way? What does he need or she need in order to feel, you know, at a 1 or closer to a 1. And again, so wouldn't necessarily use the term go into his box, because again, I guess for me that slightly lends itself to tucking our feelings away. But I guess, you know, an alternative might be, how can we help the chimp feel soothed or calm down, feel better, feel in the green zone. So yeah, so, and then this is a nice way of helping the child, you know, kind of think through, and you helping them, of course, as well, think through ways in which they can support themselves. And we've got more ideas about that in part 2 as well. Part 1 was very much about just introducing trauma and getting us to kind of understand the impact. So this is another opportunity in the video just to think what you're doing already. I'm sure you're doing lots of great interventions and making lots of resilient moves, as we call them. So a resilient move is something that you can do to support the children. So yeah, so just take a minute just to jot down some things that may have come to mind as you've been watching this video, that you perhaps had forgotten previously. You know, are you already doing some things to help children ground themselves? You know, are you already working with parents, for example? You know, are you, you know, already teaching children some ways of self-soothing? Yeah, so just take about 5 minutes to just have a think about what you're already doing in terms of supporting those children who might have experienced trauma in your school. So welcome back, and you know, it'd be interesting to hear about your lists of things that you're already doing, and also maybe thinking about, given the information that you've been exposed to in this video, what sort of what are your takeaways, and is there anything that you're already thinking about doing? And you know, we'd love to hear from you at Boing Boing. So if you want to send through any questions or any things that you're already doing in this area, that would be really useful. So you can certainly email me at I'm claire@boingboing.org.uk. So now just take a few minutes to just really just ground yourself. So just take a few deep breaths in for 3, hold it for 3, and out for 3. Take it in for 3, hold for 3. So that holding it just really slows down the breath. And when we do that deep breathing, we just keep repeating it, particularly if someone's activated or distressed, until they're much calmer, because what the deep breathing is doing is it's sending the opposite of cortisol, which is the stress hormone I mentioned earlier. It's sending the medicine for that, which is oxytocin, which is the bonding chemical. So, and that really then helps the system get into that place where, like I say, it turns the frontal lobe back on, so people can kind of think a bit more clearly, and just really calms the system. So it's good to kind of practice that, and then you really notice the difference. I did it with a young woman once, and she was like, wow, that actually really works. It's like, yeah. So just take a minute to just check in, like I say, how are you doing? Check in with your own parts and see what you might need right now. What got stirred up? Just the good thing about connecting in with ourselves sometimes is writing it down. So this part of me, you know, got set off, or I noticed this part of me, and just let your parts know that you've seen them all. You know, it's been a tough session. You really acknowledge them, and just, like I say, take a breather to be with yourself, and just really connect in, and I guess letting your own parts know that you're in the present now, and you're safe too, and you're doing your absolute best. So look forward to seeing you in part 2, and hopefully there'll be lots more information in there that you find useful too. And like I say, just, you know, also pop to our website, which is www.boingboing.org.uk, and there'll be some information on there. Also, if you want to send us any feedback, the email address is info@boingboing.org.uk. And yeah, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And like I say, I hope some of it you find useful in terms of the work that you're doing, and also, as important, look after yourself. Okay, take care. Bye.